Some structures are built to be noticed. Others are built to be trusted. Lighthouses belong to the second kind. They were not destinations. They were assurances. Their presence mattered most to people who never saw them, only the light they cast across water and darkness. Lighthouses were never meant to reassure those on land. They existed for people already in danger. Their effectiveness depended on trust, trust that the light would appear at the right moment, from the right place, every night. Most sailors never questioned that trust. They had no reason to. The system either worked or disaster followed. There was little room in between. Rubjerg Knude belonged to that quiet agreement, seen rarely, relied upon completely. Rubjerg Knude was one of them. At the turn of the 20th century, Denmark's western coast was dangerous. The North Sea was unforgiving. Sandbanks shifted. Storms erased familiar markers. Ships needed guidance long before they reached land. In 1900, construction began on a lighthouse near the village of Rubjerg. The location was chosen for visibility, not permanence. Elevation mattered more than stability. When the tower was completed in 1900, it stood safely inland, solid ground beneath it, clear sightlines toward the sea. The coastline, at the time, seemed fixed. Rubjerg Knude Lighthouse entered service in 1901. Its purpose was simple: a rotating lens, a steady beam, a warning delivered without words. It did not guide ships into harbor. It kept them away. Night after night, the light swept across the horizon, not for residents, not for visitors, for sailors who would never know its name. Life at the lighthouse was quiet and repetitive. Keepers lived nearby. Lenses were cleaned. Mechanisms maintained. The light was never allowed to fail. Most nights passed without incident. That, too, was the point. The absence of failure required constant attention. Lenses were inspected daily. Mechanisms were adjusted by hand. Any delay, any oversight, carried consequences far beyond the tower. The work was repetitive and largely invisible. Its success measured only by the lack of catastrophe. When systems like this function well, they fade from awareness. They are noticed only when they stop. Success here was invisible. Nothing happened because the system worked. But the land beneath Rubjerg Knude was never stable. Wind moved the dunes constantly. Sand accumulated where it was not wanted. Paths disappeared. Foundations slowly became exposed. The coast did not collapse. It shifted. Year after year, the shoreline crept closer. What had once been a safe distance became a concern. The lighthouse continued to operate, but its environment was changing faster than its design allowed. By the mid-20th century, the problem was no longer subtle. Sand drifted into buildings. Maintenance became difficult. The light was increasingly obscured by the very land it stood on. Technology was changing as well. New navigation systems reduced reliance on coastal beacons. Satellites and radio signals offered guidance without geography. The lighthouse was still functional, but it was no longer essential. Navigation was no longer tied to landmarks alone. Radio signals, charts, and later satellites began to guide ships independently of coastline or visibility. The sea had not changed, but the way humans understood it had. Rubjerg Knude still stood where it always had. Its light still reached the horizon. What changed was the system around it. Redundancy replaced reliance, and eventually, relevance faded without failure. In 1968, Rubjerg Knude Lighthouse was decommissioned. The light went dark. There was no dramatic failure, no final storm, no shipwreck that marked its end. the system simply moved on. Without its function, the lighthouse became something else, a structure without responsibility, a tower without obligation. Wind continued to move the dunes. Erosion accelerated along the coast. The sea claimed meters of land each year. The tower remained, but the ground beneath it did not. Visitors began to arrive, not because the lighthouse was needed, but because it was still standing. People climbed the tower. Photographs were taken. Warnings were posted as the cliff edge drew closer. The lighthouse became visible in a way it never had been before. Its original role had required anonymity. Its new role was spectacle. Function had once dictated form. Now attention did. The lighthouse became something to approach rather than something to avoid. Its visibility reversed its purpose. Where it once warned against closeness, it now invited it. The structure did not change. Only the meaning assigned to it did. Standing at Rubjerg Knude today, scale becomes deceptive. The tower feels solid, permanent, unmoved by the wind that surrounds it. But the land tells a different story. The cliff face recedes year after year. The horizon remains unchanged. Only the distance between them shrinks. The sea appears constant. The sky feels permanent. It is the land that reveals movement, slowly, without announcement. What feels stable often isn't. It simply changes at a pace that escapes attention. Rubjerg Knude did not move closer to the sea. The sea moved closer to it. There were discussions about letting the lighthouse fall. It would have been simple, natural even. Structures like this were never meant to last forever. They were meant to serve and then disappear. But Rubjerg Knude had become symbolic, not of navigation, but of endurance. In 2019, the lighthouse was moved, not dismantled, not restored to its original purpose, relocated. The entire structure was shifted inland, away from the eroding cliff, a temporary solution to a permanent process. The coast would continue to move. The lighthouse would continue to stand. For now. Rubjerg Knude did not fail. It was overtaken. Its design assumed a stable world, a coastline that behaved predictably, a system that would always require its presence. None of those assumptions held. What remains is a question, not a ruin. How long should structures outlive their purpose? When does preservation become interference? The lighthouse no longer warns ships. It warns us, not about rocks or shoals, but about confidence in fixed conditions. Rubjerg Knude stands against wind and sky, no longer essential, no longer trusted, only observed. It was built to guide others. Now it marks time, waiting, as the coast continues to move on.